Have you ever felt torn between what's right and what's easy? Have you ever had to face a choice that could change your life forever? Today, you will learn the story of Lenny Thompson, a young police officer who found himself caught in a moral dilemma capable of destroying his career or transforming a corrupt system from the inside out. In a world where injustice seems to prevail, Lenny shows us that, even when all seems lost, there is still a chance to make a difference. He had to face fear, doubt, and the pressure of betraying his own colleagues to protect the truth. If you've ever been in a situation where the truth seemed to be your only weapon, then you'll identify with this journey. And if you want to know how Lenny found the strength to keep going, even when everything was against him, then keep watching. Before we start, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss this and other stories that show how, sometimes, one person's courage can change the fate of many. The patrol car's radio whirred with distant voices, but the silence between Officer Barbrady and his rookie partner, Lenny, was almost palpable. The night was cold, and the city lights cast dancing shadows on the empty streets. Lenny gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white, as he tried to ignore what he had just heard. Barbrady, with his hard expression and cold stare, was engaged in one of his usual racist tirades, something that Lenny was beginning to realize happened with alarming frequency. "These guys think they can do whatever they want now that they've got one of their own in charge," Barbrady muttered, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "But I know exactly what's coming. This department is going to hell in a handbasket." Lenny tried to concentrate on driving, but Barbrady's words echoed in his mind. He had joined the police force with an idealistic vision, inspired by memories of his childhood, when he saw policemen as heroes. His father, a man of integrity, always said, "Remember, son, being a cop is about protecting and serving everyone, no matter who they are." These words stayed with him throughout the academy, but now, in practice, it seemed that the reality was quite different. He glanced at Barbrady, who was now lost in his own thoughts. Lenny remembered when he was a child, watching with admiration the policemen in his neighborhood, especially one veteran who always stopped to talk to the children, teaching them about justice and responsibility. That was why he had chosen this career, to be like that policeman, a symbol of hope and protection. But now, next to Barbrady, he couldn't avoid the growing feeling that something was terribly wrong. Lenny's discomfort was growing by the second, but he knew that voicing his disagreement could mean the end of his career before it had even begun. He wasn't sure how to act. Deep down, a small voice, the one that had guided him all his life, whispered that he needed to stay true to his values, but the fear of being branded a traitor by his colleagues kept him silent. The car turned a corner, and Lenny tried to push away his worries, forcing himself to focus on the patrol. However, a seed of doubt had already been planted. Something was about to change. He could feel it, and that change would start with him. As Barbrady and Lenny's patrol car made its way through the silent streets, the city lights flashed, reflecting in the rearview mirrors. The air was heavy, charged with a tension that Lenny couldn't shake off. He tried to concentrate on the road, but his mind kept wandering, lost in Barbrady's words. The admiration he had once felt for policemen like his partner was rapidly turning into an uneasy distrust. They turned another corner, entering a wider, well-lit street. It was then that Barbrady frowned, his eyes fixed on something ahead. Lenny followed his gaze and saw a shiny black car moving slowly in front of them. The car, a luxury sedan, followed the traffic rules precisely, but something about it had caught Barbrady's attention. "Look at that," Barbrady muttered, almost to himself. "I bet that guy shouldn't be driving a car like this." Lenny felt a knot forming in his stomach. He knew exactly what Barbrady was implying, but he forced himself to remain silent. The little voice inside him, the one that always guided him to the right path, was screaming that this wasn't right. However, the weight of the silence was oppressive. "Let's take a closer look," Barbrady said, squinting his eyes and leaning forward. He reached for the dashboard and switched on the emergency lights, causing the black car ahead to slow down and finally stop beside the curb. Lenny watched the driver of the sedan as the patrol car pulled up behind him. He was a well-dressed black man who seemed calm but attentive to what was happening. Lenny saw the man let out a slight sigh before gripping the steering wheel firmly. It was as if he knew something was about to happen. Barbrady wasted no time. "Let's see what he's hiding from," he said, getting out of the car with a smile that Lenny could only describe as menacing. Lenny briefly considered protesting, but the words stuck in his throat. He couldn't deny the discomfort he felt, but he couldn't find the courage to act either. Getting out of the car, Lenny prepared himself for what he knew would be an unfair approach. The discomfort in his chest was growing, and he could only wonder how long he could keep his cool in the face of something he knew was wrong. Lenny approached the black car, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the silent street. He could feel the tension in the air, each movement seeming heavier than usual. Barbrady, on the other hand, seemed completely at ease, as if he had done this countless times before. The veteran leaned towards the driver's window, his face hardened, and tapped on the glass impatiently. The glass slowly lowered, revealing the calm, composed face of DeAndre Johnson. He looked at Barbrady with a mixture of caution and firmness, as if prepared for anything that might happen. "Good evening, officers. Is there a problem?" His voice was calm, but Lenny noticed the slight tremor in his hands as he kept them both on the steering wheel, in view. "Documents now," Barbrady demanded, ignoring DeAndre's question. His tone was rude, full of disdain, and Lenny couldn't help but feel a twinge of shame. He knew that this approach was not about security or law enforcement, but about the prejudice that Barbrady carried. DeAndre didn't hesitate. He removed the documents from a meticulously organized glove compartment and handed them to Barbrady. As the veteran examined them, Lenny observed DeAndre's face, which seemed almost impassive, but there was something in his eyes that suggested a long history of experiences like that. Lenny felt discomfort grow inside him, like a knot tightening in his stomach. "DeAndre Johnson," Barbrady read aloud, as if the name alone were an accusation. "What are you doing here, Mr. Johnson?" "I'm on my way to an important meeting," replied DeAndre, still keeping his cool. "May I ask why I was stopped?" Barbrady ignored the question and pressed on. "A meeting, huh? At this time of night? What exactly do you work on to be able to drive a car like this?" Lenny watched the interaction with growing discomfort. He knew DeAndre hadn't done anything wrong, but the way Barbrady handled the situation made it clear that he was looking for something, anything, to justify that stop. DeAndre took a deep breath before answering, keeping his composure. "I'm an executive in a technology company. I work hard to earn what I have, officer." Barbrady smiled bitterly. "Oh yeah, and you think you can just walk through here unnoticed? Maybe you're hiding something." He took a step back and put his hand on his holster, as if he was preparing for something much bigger than a simple document check. Lenny felt panic rising. He knew the situation was about to spiral out of control. Barbrady was pushing a narrative that didn't exist, trying to turn an innocent man into a criminal just because of his own prejudiced beliefs. His father's voice echoed in his mind. Being a cop is about protecting and serving everyone. But how could he protect someone from his own partner? Before Lenny could react, Barbrady gave the order he had been dreading. "Get out of the car, Mr. Johnson," he said. In a voice that brooked no questioning, DeAndre hesitated for a second, his eyes wandering to Lenny, as if looking for some form of support or reassurance that everything would be all right. But Lenny was frozen, unable to act. With a resigned sigh, DeAndre opened the door and got out of the car, raising his hands slightly to show that he posed no threat. Lenny knew something was terribly wrong, but still couldn't find the words or the courage to intervene. The tension in the air was so thick that it seemed difficult to breathe, and Lenny felt that the situation was about to explode. Barbrady circled DeAndre's car like a predator stalking its prey, his eyes scanning every inch of the vehicle in search of something he could use to incriminate the man. Lenny was standing to the side, watching with growing discomfort as he tried to ignore the feeling that he was being complicit in something deeply wrong. "Nice car, Mr. Johnson," Barbrady commented, his tone laced with sarcasm. "Must have cost a fortune. Tell me, how can someone like you afford something like that?" DeAndre remained calm, even in the face of the obvious provocation. "I work hard, officer. As I said before, I'm an executive in a technology company. This car is just the fruit of my efforts." Barbrady stopped, his narrowed eyes fixed on DeAndre. "Is that so? Let's see what you're hiding, then." Without waiting for an answer, he opened the driver's door and started rummaging around inside the car. "Officer, this is completely unnecessary," DeAndre protested, stepping forward. I don't consent to this search. I've done nothing wrong. But Barbrady was determined. You have something to hide, don't you? It's always like this with you. As Barbrady fiddled with the car, Lenny felt sweat trickle down the back of his neck. He knew it was wrong. He knew he should do something. But the thought of confronting Barbrady paralyzed him. His hands were shaking, and he could barely breathe regularly. Everything in his training, everything he believed in, was being challenged at that moment. Suddenly, Lenny saw Barbrady make a discreet movement with his hand, taking something out of his pocket and placing it under the driver's seat. The world seemed to stop for a moment as Lenny processed what he had just witnessed. He knew what it was. A small bag of white powder. Barbrady was setting him up. Well, Barbrady said with a victorious smile, lifting the bag of white powder. What have we here, Mr. Johnson? Looks like we've found something interesting. DeAndre looked at the bag in disbelief, his eyes widening in shock. That's not mine. You planted that. His voice, once calm and controlled, was now filled with indignation and fear. Lenny felt his heart race. He knew DeAndre was telling the truth. He had seen everything. But what should he do now? His father's voice echoed again in his mind. Protect and serve everyone, no matter who they are. Lenny knew he was facing a crucial choice. Barbrady approached DeAndre, waving the handcuffs in one hand. You're under arrest, Mr. Johnson, for drug possession and maybe something else. DeAndre took a step back, his eyes meeting Lenny's, begging for some intervention. You saw what happened. You know this is a setup. Please tell the truth. Lenny stood there, frozen, as Barbrady approached to handcuff DeAndre. The weight of the moment pressed down on his shoulders, forcing him to make a decision. Would he be loyal to his partner, or do what he knew was right? Everything seemed to fall apart around him as Lenny struggled with his conscience. He knew that if he didn't do something, an innocent man's life would be destroyed. He needed to find the courage, but fear held him prisoner. Barbrady was about to handcuff DeAndre when, finally, Lenny felt a force emerge within him. He couldn't stand by any longer. He knew what needed to be done. What would you have done in Lenny's place? Leave your opinion in the comments below. Time seemed to slow down as Lenny watched Barbrady approach DeAndre with the handcuffs ready. The veteran's words were like a distant echo, but Lenny's inner voice, the one that had been trying to make itself heard, was now screaming inside his mind. He knew he was on the brink of a decision that could change the course of his life forever. Barbrady was inches away from handcuffing DeAndre, and Lenny felt his body paralyzed with fear. His thoughts scrambled, old memories rising to the surface. He remembered the day he received his badge, the pride he felt, the look of approval from his father. Being a policeman was a dream come true, a lifelong commitment. But at that moment, everything seemed to fall apart. Protect and serve everyone, his father's voice echoed in his mind. That's not just a phrase, son. It's an oath. Lenny closed his eyes for a second, trying to calm down, but panic choked him. He thought of all the times he had seen Barbrady get away with situations that were not in keeping with the ethics of the profession. He thought of all the other police officers who had preferred silence to justice. And now, there he was, facing the same dilemma. If he told the truth, his career could be over. He could be marginalized by his colleagues, seen as a traitor. But if he remained silent, he would be betraying everything he believed in, all the lessons his father had taught him. He knew he couldn't live with that weight. DeAndre continued to look at him, his eyes full of fear but also hope. It was as if he knew that Lenny was facing an internal battle. Barbrady, on the other hand, seemed completely sure of himself, certain that Lenny wouldn't dare challenge him. Lenny looked up at the sky for a moment, trying to find an answer. Siren lights painted the street with red and blue flashes. The sound of traffic in the distance seemed muffled, as if the whole world was waiting for his decision. Lenny felt a wave of despair, but also of clarity. He knew he was at a crossroads. Finally, something inside Lenny broke. He couldn't be complicit in such a blatant injustice. The guilt would consume him for the rest of his life. He took a deep breath and, heart pounding, decided what he needed to do. Lenny felt his hands shaking as he took a step forward. Stop! His voice sounded firm, surprising even himself. Barbrady froze, slowly turning to face his partner, an expression of pure disbelief on his face. "What did you say, rookie?" Barbrady asked, his voice laden with menace. Lenny knew he was treading on dangerous territory, but there was no turning back now. He took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline rush through his body. "I said stop, Barbrady," Lenny repeated, this time with even more conviction. He positioned himself between Barbrady and DeAndre, raising a hand to signal that he would not allow his partner to advance. Barbrady, visibly irritated, took a step forward, approaching Lenny with his finger cocked. "Do you know what you're doing, kid? You're ruining your career. You don't know who you're messing with." Lenny felt a chill run down his spine, but stood his ground. "I know exactly what I'm doing," he replied, looking straight into Barbrady's eyes. "And you also know that this isn't right. You planted that drug in his car. This man is innocent." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The tension in the air was so thick that Lenny could almost feel it pressing against him. DeAndre, still stunned by the revelation, looked at Lenny with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. Barbrady, on the other hand, stood motionless, his eyes full of fury. "You're an idiot, Lenny," he whispered, moving even closer. "You'll regret this. Nobody defies me and gets away with it." Lenny knew he was risking everything. His dream of being a policeman, his reputation, maybe even his safety. But at that moment, he felt an inner strength he had never felt before. He knew he was doing the right thing, and that was what mattered. "If protecting and serving means losing my job for doing the right thing, then so be it," Lenny said, his voice firm, despite the fear that still consumed him. "I'm not going to be a part of it." Barbrady was silent for a second, his face contorted in anger. But before he could reply, the sound of rapid footsteps caught their attention. It was DeAndre, who had finally found a small spark of hope. "Officer Thompson," he said, his voice strong, "thank you." The tension was on the verge of exploding, and Lenny knew the consequences would be serious. But he didn't care anymore. He had made his choice. If you like this story of courage and justice, leave a like to help us spread the word. The silence that followed Lenny's statement was interrupted only by the distant sound of a car passing in the distance. Barbrady looked at him with restrained fury, his fists clenched at his sides. The street, which had previously seemed deserted, began to come alive as people noticed the unusual situation unfolding. A few curious people began to stop on the sidewalks, and soon a small crowd was forming. Barbrady looked around, noticing the growing attention they were attracting. His face contorted with anger, but Lenny noticed a subtle change in his posture, an awareness that he was running out of options. The sirens of the emergency lights continued to flash, casting restless shadows on the facades of the surrounding buildings. "Do you really want to do this here, in front of everyone?" Barbrady whispered, his voice low but laden with menace. Before Lenny could reply, a blinding flash illuminated the scene. He blinked, surprised to see a reporter approaching with a camera, already capturing images. "Captain Johnson, can you tell us what's going on here?" shouted the reporter, apparently not realizing that DeAndre had not yet identified himself. The presence of the media only served to intensify the pressure. Barbrady turned sharply, raising his hands to block the camera. "Back off, this is an ongoing investigation," he snarled. But it was too late. The small commotion was already drawing the attention of everyone around, and the curious were now filming with their cell phones. Lenny felt the weight of the situation intensify. He knew that what happened in the next few hours could be decisive, not only for him and DeAndre, but also for the entire department. The surrounding crowd began to murmur, their anxious gazes fixed on the exchange of words between the officers and the man who had not yet been officially recognized as captain. DeAndre, taking advantage of the moment of distraction, raised his head and stepped forward, attracting everyone's gaze. "I'm DeAndre Johnson," he began, but was interrupted by Barbrady, who raised his voice in a threatening tone. "I said shut up." Barbrady advanced, but Lenny, moved by the urgency of the situation and the need to protect the truth, put out an arm to block the way. "Enough, Barbrady," Lenny said, more firmly than he felt. "The media are already here. There's no more covering up what you've done." Barbrady hesitated for a moment, his eyes fixed on Lenny, full of hatred. But before he could reply, the surrounding crowd began to murmur louder, some people shouting for DeAndre to speak. Lenny felt his heart race. He knew that the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control, and the pressure of being at the center of that hurricane was overwhelming. But he also knew that he couldn't back down now. He had made a decision, and he was determined to stick to it, regardless of the consequences. The surrounding crowd continued to grow, and the tension in the air was almost palpable. Barbrady, now aware that he was being filmed by several cameras, looked even angrier. His eyes flashed sparks of anger as he tried to maintain a facade of control, but Lenny could see the cracks in his mask. The veteran was about to lose control. "I'm warning you, Thompson," Barbrady hissed, stepping closer to Lenny. "You don't want to make enemies in the department. This is your last chance to back down." Lenny didn't move. He knew Barbrady was trying to intimidate him, but he felt he had already passed the point of no return. If he backed down now, he would be destroying not only DeAndre's life, but also his own integrity. "I can't do that, Barbrady," Lenny replied, his voice firm despite the fear that still gripped his chest. "You planted those drugs, and you know it." Barbrady stepped forward, so close that Lenny could feel the veteran's warm breath on his face. "You're a traitor, Thompson. I'll make sure you never set foot in a police station again." Barbrady's gaze was deadly, but before he could do anything, DeAndre spoke again, with a calm that contrasted with the chaos around him. "I am the new captain of this department," he announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And I will not allow this injustice to continue." The revelation caused the murmuring of the crowd to increase in intensity. The cameras turned to DeAndre, who was now the center of all attention. Lenny was momentarily relieved to see Barbrady step back, if only for a second. The veteran was clearly shocked, and for the first time, Lenny saw a glimmer of uncertainty in his eyes. "You're lying," Barbrady finally managed to say, but his voice was shaky. You can't, that's not possible." DeAndre took another step forward, raising his hands to show that he was unarmed. "Check the records, Barbrady. I'm Captain DeAndre Johnson, and I have all the authority to do that." The crowd started cheering, and the atmosphere around them became even more chaotic. Barbrady, realizing that he had lost control of the situation, took a step back, his expression changing from fury to a kind of barely contained despair. "This isn't over, Thompson," Barbrady snarled, before spinning on his heels and walking away, forcing his way through the crowd that was now glaring at him. Lenny watched as Barbrady disappeared into the night, knowing that things would never be the same again. DeAndre turned to Lenny, the applause from the crowd echoing around him. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "I know it wasn't easy." Lenny felt a weight lift off his shoulders, but also a new responsibility settling in. He had made a decision that would change his life forever, and he still wasn't sure what it would mean for his future. But he did know one thing. He had made the right choice. The chaos in the street slowly began to subside as the crowd absorbed what had just happened. DeAndre Johnson, the man Barbrady had tried to frame, was now revealed as the new police captain, a fact that seemed incredibly hard to believe for those who had witnessed the confrontation. The media, always eager for a story, wasted no time in capturing every detail, and Lenny felt the weight of the cameras pointed at them. Barbrady had disappeared into the darkness, but the consequences of his actions had only just begun. Lenny, still processing what had happened, looked at DeAndre, trying to understand how this man had managed to remain calm in the face of so much injustice. "Officer Thompson," DeAndre began, his voice laden with authority but also with understanding, "I know you faced a difficult choice tonight, and I want you to know that your courage did not go unnoticed." Lenny tried to find the words to reply, but all he could do was nod. What he had done still didn't seem real. He, a rookie on the force, had defied a corrupt veteran and helped save the life of an innocent man. But more than that, he had helped expose a much bigger problem within the police department. DeAndre turned to the crowd and the reporters, his posture imposing and assured. "I officially take over as captain of this department, and I want everyone to know that my commitment is to justice and truth. I will not tolerate corruption or prejudice in any form." DeAndre's words were met with applause from some people in the crowd, but Lenny noticed that there were also looks of doubt, even skepticism. He knew that DeAndre's words were strong, but he also knew that transforming the department would not be an easy task. There were many like Barbrady, who operated in the shadows, and Lenny knew that the battle was only just beginning. As DeAndre continued to talk to the press, promising a full investigation and reforms in the department, Lenny sat in silence, trying to process everything that was happening. He looked around, seeing faces he knew, some from co-workers, others from residents of the community. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. The pressure on Lenny seemed to increase by the second. He had done the right thing, but the consequences were only just beginning to unfold. He knew that the reaction within the department could be severe, and that he had probably made powerful enemies. But at that moment, as he looked at DeAndre, he saw a leader who was willing to face the same struggles as him, and that gave him a small spark of hope. DeAndre ended his statement to the press with a promise of transparency and accountability, something Lenny knew would be difficult to fulfill in a department where so many were used to operating without scrutiny. But for the first time that night, Lenny felt that there was a real chance of change. As the reporters began to disperse, Lenny took a step towards DeAndre. "Captain Johnson," he began, his voice a little firmer. "I'm ready to help in any way I can." DeAndre looked at him, and a small but genuine smile appeared on his face. "I knew I could count on you, Thompson. We've got a lot of work ahead of us." Lenny nodded, feeling that, despite everything, he had made the right decision. He was standing next to someone he could trust, and that was what mattered. Chapter 5: The Revelation and the Consequences. As the crowd began to disperse, still murmuring about the events they had witnessed, DeAndre Johnson gestured to one of the officers present, signaling that it was time to act. Lenny watched as two officers, who had been watching everything from a distance, approached DeAndre with serious expressions, aware of the seriousness of the situation. "Officers, I want you to locate Officer Barbrady immediately," DeAndre ordered, his voice firm and unwavering. "He must be detained and taken into custody. We will not allow someone who has broken the law to continue wearing a badge." The officers nodded and quickly made their way to the patrol cars, heading out in search of Barbrady. Lenny watched in silence, still processing everything that had happened. The feeling that the department was finally starting to right itself filled him with a strange relief, but also with a heavy responsibility. He knew that things wouldn't be easy for him. As they waited for the officers to return, DeAndre approached Lenny, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "You made the right decision tonight, Thompson," he said, with a look that conveyed both respect and gratitude. "It's not easy to stand up against your own colleagues, especially someone like that. He has so many years of service." Lenny felt a lump in his throat, but managed to respond with a nod. "It's what I had to do, sir," he said, in a voice that, despite everything, still trembled a little. I just didn't know things could come to this." DeAndre nodded, understanding the weight Lenny was carrying. "The system is flawed, Thompson, and unfortunately, there are still a lot of Barbradys out there. But that's why we need people like you, willing to do what's right, even when it's hard." Before Lenny could reply, the sound of sirens in the distance caught their attention. The officers who had gone out to look for Barbrady were back, and with them, a handcuffed Barbrady, still in uniform, but now with an expression of despair on his face. The remaining crowd murmured as the officers escorted Barbrady to where DeAndre and Lenny were standing. Barbrady struggled against the handcuffs, but the struggle was more one of wounded pride than a real attempt to escape. When he finally got in front of DeAndre, he stopped struggling, staring at the new captain with hatred in his eyes. "You may have won this one, Johnson," Barbrady hissed, his voice full of spite. "But it doesn't end here. You and that traitor will pay for this." DeAndre remained calm, undeterred by Barbrady's words. "What's over is your impunity," he replied in a firm tone. "From now on, everyone will answer for their actions in this department, starting with you." The officers began to lead Barbrady towards the patrol car, but before he could be placed in the vehicle, Lenny stepped forward, finally finding the courage to speak. "Barbrady, you've corrupted yourself," he said, his voice firm. "I'm not the traitor here. You betrayed the trust of the people you swore to protect." Barbrady glared at Lenny, but said nothing more. He was pushed into the patrol car, the doors closing with a final slam. As the car drove away, Lenny felt a weight lift from his shoulders, but also a new responsibility. He knew that, although Barbrady was out of the picture, the battles within the department were only just beginning. But with DeAndre by his side, he felt they could face anything. DeAndre looked at Lenny and nodded approvingly. "Let's start the real change now, Thompson," he said, starting to walk towards the police station. Lenny followed him, knowing that tonight was just the beginning of something much bigger. Do you want to know how this story ends and follow others like it? Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a chapter. Dawn brought new light to the city, but inside the police department, the shadows of the previous night's events still hung heavy over everyone. The atmosphere was charged with tension and anticipation. Murmurs were constant, and furtive glances were cast in Lenny and DeAndre's direction as they walked down the corridors. Lenny felt the weight of these stares. He knew that many of his colleagues now saw him as a traitor, someone who had broken the code of silence that many there prided themselves on maintaining. Each step he took through the department seemed more difficult than the last. He could hear the whispering, feel the tensions building, but he held his head high. He knew he had done the right thing, and that was what kept him going. DeAndre, by his side, was the embodiment of calm and authority. His presence seemed to attract both respect and resistance, and he was clearly aware of the battle still to come. As he passed the officers, some greeted him with a respectful nod, while others simply looked away. DeAndre didn't seem to be fazed by any of this. "We need to get the team together for an immediate meeting," DeAndre told Lenny, as they headed for his new office. "We have a lot to discuss and even more to fix." Lenny nodded, knowing that this would only be the first of many difficult meetings to come. The decisions that would be made there could define the future of the department, and he was determined to be part of that change. As he entered the office, Lenny noticed that the team that had been called together was already assembled. There was a palpable tension in the room, and the officers' faces showed a mixture of distrust, weariness, and, in some cases, hope. DeAndre took up his position at the front, with Lenny at his side, and began to speak. "Everyone here knows what happened last night," DeAndre began, his voice firm and clear. "And I want to make one thing very clear. There will be no more room for corruption or prejudice in this department. We are here to serve and protect all the citizens of this city, regardless of color, class, or any other difference. As of today, this will be our unwavering commitment." The room fell silent, the officers absorbing DeAndre's words. Lenny felt a surge of pride and renewed determination. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he was prepared to face the challenges alongside DeAndre. The department was on the verge of a transformation, and he was part of that change. The meeting continued in a silence full of expectations. DeAndre, aware of the resistance he would face, began to outline the first steps of his vision to reform the department. He knew that the changes would not be accepted easily, but he also knew that the integrity of the department depended on these reforms. "In the next few days, we'll be implementing new conduct guidelines, which will include mandatory training in ethics and unconscious bias," DeAndre announced, his eyes sweeping the room to make sure everyone was paying attention. "We will start working on a culture of transparency and accountability. Internal investigations will be conducted rigorously, and any misconduct will be treated with the seriousness it deserves." Lenny watched his colleagues' reactions. Some seemed receptive, nodding their heads in approval. Others, however, maintained closed expressions, arms crossed, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of stricter supervision. But what caught Lenny's attention most were the looks on the faces of some of the younger officers. There was a mixture of hope and uncertainty there, but also a hunger for change, for something better than the corrupt system they knew. After the meeting, as the officers left, some still whispering among themselves, Lenny remained by DeAndre's side. "It's going to be difficult," he said, his voice reflecting both determination and slight concern. "There's a lot of resistance here, a lot to change." DeAndre nodded, fully understanding the weight of the challenge ahead. "I know," he replied, his voice calm. "But you saw what I saw in there, didn't you? There's a new generation of officers who want more, who want to do the right thing. We need to invest in them, give them the tools and support they need to change that culture from the inside out." Lenny reflected on this, remembering his own journey up to that point. He knew that, in time, he could become a mentor to these younger officers, showing them the path he himself had chosen to follow. And, as difficult as it was, he was committed to helping build a better department. As they left the office, Lenny saw some of the young recruits looking at him with something akin to admiration. He knew he had a long road ahead of him, but he also knew he wasn't alone in this struggle. DeAndre patted Lenny on the back, signaling that it was time to get back to work. "Let's start now, Thompson," he said, with a determined smile. "There's a lot to do, and time is not on our side." Lenny took a deep breath and nodded. Together, they began to chart the path to a better future, one step at a time. The days that followed were intense, filled with meetings, training, and a constant watch on what was being done in the department. DeAndre Johnson led with unwavering determination, and Lenny was always by his side, absorbing everything and contributing where he could. The transition to a new era in the police department was just beginning, and everyone knew that the road would be long and arduous. The new trainings implemented by DeAndre brought in experts in police ethics and racial awareness, people who had never set foot in the department before. The classes, which had previously been seen by many as a formality, now became moments of intense reflection and, for some, discomfort. Lenny watched his colleagues' reactions with interest, noticing that while some were genuinely interested in learning, others maintained a silent but palpable resistance. One of the most significant moments came when DeAndre invited veteran officers to share their experiences with the younger ones. The idea was to promote an open dialogue about past mistakes and lessons learned. Lenny felt a mixture of emotions when he attended these sessions. Some veterans admitted that, for too long, they had turned a blind eye to the injustices around them, preferring loyalty to the system to personal integrity. Others, as Lenny had hoped, stood firm in their old convictions, refusing to accept that anything needed to change. "This is just the beginning," DeAndre told Lenny after one of these sessions. "But every conversation, every training session, is planting a seed. It's going to take time, but we're building something that could eventually turn this department into a model for others to follow." Lenny, who had been asked to share his own experience on the front line of that transformation, realized how far he had come since that fateful night. He was now seen as a symbol of change, someone who had challenged the status quo and emerged stronger. But he knew that his struggle was far from over. One afternoon, after a long day of training, Lenny was approached by a group of young recruits who had recently joined the police academy. They had heard about his story and wanted to know more. "Officer Thompson," began one of the recruits, a young man barely 20 years old, "how did you manage to do what you did? How did you find the courage to stand up to someone like Bar Brady?" Lenny pondered the question, knowing that the answer wasn't simple. He remembered all the sleepless nights, all the doubts that plagued him, but also every moment when his father's voice guided him. "It wasn't easy," he replied, looking straight into the young recruit's eyes. "But the truth is that sometimes you have to choose between what's easy and what's right. If you want to be a good policeman, you need to be prepared to make that choice. And when the time comes, you'll know what the right choice is." The recruits listened carefully, absorbing every word. Lenny realized that, just as he had been influenced by a veteran policeman when he was young, he was now playing a similar role for the next generation. This cycle of learning and growing was fundamental to the change he and DeAndre were trying to implement. DeAndre watched the interaction between Lenny and the recruits from afar, feeling a quiet satisfaction. Change was happening, perhaps not at the speed he wanted, but the first steps had been taken, and the path ahead, although challenging, was clearer. At the end of the day, Lenny and DeAndre met again in the office. "How did it go with the recruits?" DeAndre asked, with a smile knowing the answer. Lenny smiled back. "They're ready for a change, Captain. They just need someone to believe in them." DeAndre nodded. "And that's what we're going to do, Thompson. We're going to keep believing. Because the only way to really change something is to never give up." And with those words, they continued their journey, knowing that the future of the police was largely in their hands. Night fell over the city, bringing with it a tranquil silence that contrasted with the turbulent events of recent weeks. The police department was finally quiet, the lights of the building glowing softly against the dark sky. DeAndre and Lenny were sitting in the meeting room, reviewing the progress made so far and discussing the next steps. "We've done a lot, but there's still a long way to go," said DeAndre, leafing through the reports that had been compiled throughout the renovation process. But what matters is that we've started, and we won't stop until this department is what it should be. Lenny nodded, feeling exhausted but also more determined than ever. Staring at the horizon through the large windows of the room, he thought about how his life had changed since that night he faced Barbrady. He had risked everything and somehow managed to come out the other side stronger, certain that he had done the right thing. As they prepared to call it a day, DeAndre looked at Lenny with an expression that mixed weariness and pride. You know, Thompson, not everyone would have done what you did. Not everyone would have had the courage to take on what seemed like a lost cause. Lenny smiled, a tired but sincere smile. I only did what needed to be done, Captain. I guess, at the end of the day, that's what defines us as police officers. It's not what we do when things are easy, but when everything is against us. DeAndre nodded, agreeing wholeheartedly. He stood up, collecting his papers and preparing to leave. We're going to keep fighting for this, Thompson. The road will be long, but we're on the right track. And in time, we'll see the seeds we planted today grow and bear fruit. Lenny stood still for a moment, absorbing DeAndre's words. The idea that he was helping to plant the seeds for a better future filled him with a sense of purpose. He wasn't just changing the department. He was changing the course of his own life and influencing the next generation of police officers. Before they left, DeAndre paused at the door and looked at Lenny one more time. If you need anything, you know where to find me. We're in this together. Lenny smiled and nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude. I know, Captain, and I thank you for believing in me. I won't let you down. DeAndre nodded and left, leaving Lenny alone in the room for a moment. He looked around, realizing how far he had come since the day he entered that department as a young, idealistic recruit. Now, he was more than a policeman. He was part of something bigger, something that could really make a difference. When he finally left the building, Lenny felt the cool night air and looked up at the stars. There was still a lot to be done, but he knew he was on the right track. And as he walked to his car, a sense of hope filled him. He knew that the future was uncertain and that the battles to come would be difficult, but he also knew that, with DeAndre by their side and the determination to do what was right, they could overcome any obstacle. As he drove through the silent streets of the city, Lenny felt a peace he hadn't felt for a long time. He had found his place, his purpose, and with that in mind, he was ready to face whatever tomorrow brought.